Hi, my name is Eric Nathan. I'm the composer in residence of the New England Philharmonic.
Hi, I'm Danielle Maddon. I'm the concertmaster of the New England Philharmonic.
And we welcome you to Listening In, a deep dive into the music with the NEP. It's a series where we speak to composers and performers about their art and their work. And it's also a chance for us to help our audiences hear this music, taking a step behind the scenes to see how it's made, what's inspired it, and how performances of it have come together. And we're featuring composers and performers that we are featuring this season with the NEP on this series. And today we have a guest. Our guest is Igor Santos. And while you are tuning in on YouTube, you can feel free to submit questions via the chat. So we'll get to these over the course of the interview and also save time at the end for questions. So Igor Santos is the 2021 winner of the NEP's annual Call for Scores and will be performing his work Ploy Pivot on the June 18th concert at Jordan Hall. And Igor's music has been presented internationally by leading musicians and ensembles such as Ensemble del Niente, Ensemble Moderne, Ensemble Contemporain, and he has earned his PhD degree at the University of Chicago and is a recipient of the Rome Prize and the Guggenheim Fellowship. And so we're very happy to welcome Igor. Welcome.
Hey, thank you. It's my pleasure.
So today we're going to be taking a dive into two of Igor's works. The first is Ploy Pivot for chamber orchestra, which the NEP will be performing. And then we'll take a look at Anima for harp and percussion. And so before we start, we thought it would be nice to have our listeners get to know you better as a composer. So I was wondering if you could share with us, how did you first know you wanted to be a composer?
Well, I think for me, it was actually pretty late that I knew I wanted to be a composer. I only really I kind of started music a little on the late side when I was maybe around 10 with playing guitar and just, being self-taught and just doing music for my own pleasure as a hobby kind of thing. But it was quite a serious hobby and I took it quite seriously. But then when I went to college, I never really, there's no artists or musicians per se in my family, so the idea of doing something creative as a career kind of thing wasn't even in the landscape of things I thought I would do. So I actually started college as I intended to go and study psychiatry. So I was starting pre-med and all that stuff. And then I took one music theory course and I had to write some pieces for that course. And I was like, oh, actually, this is what I like to do. And then I changed and it was all, then, the rest is history. But yeah, so I really decided to become a composer second year of college. But I've been doing it since a little bit younger.
So that first music theory course in college that sort of turned you on to the idea of composing, was there a particular teacher or something, someone maybe who sparked your interest or encouraged your talent as a composer?
Yeah, 100%. His name is Michael Sidney Timpson. And I think the other person who taught the same class in the different semester was Chi-Chun Lee. Both were composers. Both were also composers on faculty of University of South Florida. And, when they saw my composition assignment, and I had composed before, so it wasn't like it was a new thing for me to write music, but they saw that I knew how to write music, or, kind of knew, I suppose. And yeah, they really encouraged me to continue on with composition lessons and yeah, and also 100%. If they hadn't been my teacher, I'm not sure if I would have, declared a major in composition, per se. But yeah, so yeah, it was very much their support in the early days. Yeah.
Great. Well, now you think you're calling in from Rome, Italy, where you're in residence at the American Academy in Rome. I was just curious what your experience has been like there. I was there a number of years ago as well, and it's a wonderful community of so many different artists and scholars. Just curious how your time has been.
Yeah, I think overall, we have a little bit more than 2 months left, so we're reaching the end of the residency. But overall, yeah, my time here has been lovely. It's been a mix of making some very close friends, of making some serious collaborations, like collaborations that have lasted throughout the year in conversations about also in projects. And generally a lot of learning on my part, from the scholars and the visual artists and writers, et cetera, the architects. Before coming here, I don't know how it was for you, Eric, but for me, I had this preconceived notion that I would just be in my studio all the time and I would just be composing and reading and all this independent work. This is what I imagined it would be. And I was like very excited for it. But then when you're here, it's actually kind of a program. And you forget, there's a lot of other people. And so there are communal meals every day. There's these communal walk and talks. All of the fellows present on their work. So you're always, thinking about other people's stuff too. And all of this is great. It's not a complaint on my part, but it does take a lot of time to digest all of this new information, these new ideas. And especially, I think if you're an introverted person like myself, it takes up a lot of energy as well. And that's all to say that it's been remarkably interesting in that way, and also pretty intense. The year for me was by no means a passive year. It's like much to the contrary.
Yeah, it's like being in residence at a interdisciplinary institute, where there's so much going on, and you could actually go the whole year, and just if you went to all the events and partake in all the walks and all the things happening, you may not write any music at all.
Yes,
but it's finding the time there. But I've found that the relationships I've made with the artists and scholars there have been now lifelong friendships, and really got me to think and create in different ways. So it was really kind of a pivotal year in that point. Being in Rome takes you in unexpected directions. I find people may think of what they're trying to do when they start. When they leave, they've found a new path in some way.
Yeah, and I think but just the city itself also. I mean, I didn't really think about whether I would like the city or not, but ultimately I really love the city, and just it's it's an endless outdoor museum, kind of thing.
Yeah, beautiful.
Speaking of the Italian scene, I was wondering, what is the musical scene like there in Rome in terms of new music? Is there a lot going on? Do people program lots of international new music?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the best person to speak to that question, only because it was a strange year in the sense that the pandemic was still happening. So I didn't go to many concerts. In fact, I only went to 3 concerts throughout the whole year. One was a new music concert at the Parco della Musica, which is this big center for classical music, both canonical but also contemporary music. They have a particular contemporary music program there. I think the season is now finished, but it's run by this gentleman called Tonino Battista. And I think it's called the Parco della Musica Contemporanea Ensemble or something like that. And I went to a concert of Pamela Z's music. She was here as a returning fellow I think she was here for 6 weeks, and she did this big song cycle, hour-long piece, which was great. And it was really well performed and well attended. I think this was in March. And then otherwise, I think I've been to one choral concert, which was in a church close to where the academy is. And the other concert I went to was an experimental indie rock concert, which was thrilling, I have to say. It was several, like 10 bands or something, and they were all very different, doing very weird stuff, and very interesting approach to staging, very approach to performance, very on the experimental side of things. It was quite remarkable. So I think, yeah, there's a cool underground scene here that I'm not fully familiar with, but I know that there is some. I've seen just a little bit of it. Alvin Curan is here, the American composer who's lived in Rome since the mid 60s. And he was doing this thing, I think it was called Musica Electronica Viva for years. and I'm not sure if it happens still now, but I think he's still leading every once in a while a group of experimental performances, mostly dealing with improvisation. Yeah, so there are things here for sure. I have explored so little because of the restrictions and my own schedule and all of that. So that's what I can say about it.
Great, thanks. So I thought let's dive into the first work, Ploy Pivot. And so I know you've written in the program note about creating a musical narrative through both contrast and also interruption. And so I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to this and your concept for this piece.
Yeah, sure. I think I'll try to answer this simply, which is I think I was just trying to create a kind of a music where several things can happen at once. And these things that would not necessarily, they wouldn't even match, but that somehow it would make sense, And I was trying to see if I could do something that was that weird, but that could also be somewhat emotionally rewarding, or engaging to the ears. So when I said that, yeah, it's a musical narrative that's about contrast. I'm speaking specifically of contrast of affect, so different themes or objects exist at the same time, but they don't necessarily match in a traditional sense, meaning they don't match harmonically necessarily, or and even character-wise, they're very different characters. They're deliberately made to be contrasting, right? So I think, for example, at the beginning of the piece, there's this lyrical harp music that happens, and then you get this kind of sudden interjection of a percussive hit, right? And overall, there's a lot of this kind of either very contrasting happening at the same time, or kind of music that keeps going and gets interrupted. And I was really just trying to see what would I feel if I had these things heard, and what would happen if these weird superpositions, juxtapositions occurred. Yeah, so that's kind of the impetus for the piece.
Yeah.
Tonight, Igor, tonight is our first rehearsal of your piece
cool.
at the NEP. So we're all of us are very excited to dive in. And I noticed in your program note, you mentioned that this was the first piece in a series of pieces that would explore your theme. And I'm wondering, are there other pieces now in the series?
I guess the answer to that is yes and no. No, in the sense, because I've not done a piece that's been specifically about this idea, not as a complete piece, So I say no, because I haven't really continued the series per se, but a lot of the ideas that I was working with definitely crept into other works, I think this is the first piece in grad school that I wrote that I still find cool, that I can still listen to. And I wrote it fairly quickly, actually, because I had these ideas in mind for a long time. And I think it's very much an orchestral piece in the sense that you can really create these different characters because you have the full orchestra, whereas if you're doing it as a piano piece, it might be much harder or something. So a lot of the ideas behind this piece, when I mention these things that are superposed, they often happen like they'll have a loop of something happening, and then you have a loop of something else happening, and they don't quite align rhythmically, but they keep repeating independently, So was the beginning of what continued to be a long exploration of repetition in future works, So yeah, and just generally similar ideas of kind of narrative and interruption. I've continued to do that. I find it interesting still. So yeah, so that's yes and no.
Well, I'm so glad that you still like this piece. I know it's now a number of years old. It's 2014, 2015. And just to share a little behind the scenes, so as part of my role as composer in residence, I have the great pleasure of viewing the call for scores each year, which has been in existence, this annual call, since 1985. So it's quite a long running program. And when I was reviewing the call for scores last year, we have so many phenomenal submissions, and I kept returning to your piece, and I found that I just keep listening to it over and over and still want to listen to it again. And it was just very enjoyable for me. So I really love it, and I'm glad it's still in one of your, I know can be earlier works, but this is a beautiful one, and I look forward for us listening to it soon.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah. So you also mentioned in your program notes that you have an interest in you also have written this in homage, in a sense, to Toru Takemitsu, the composer. And I was wondering for our listeners if you could describe how Takemitsu's music has influenced you and in this work too.
I think first of all, it's just from a personal affinity kind of thing. Takemitsu being, an Asian composer in the Western world. When I was in high school, being a Brazilian composer, and I'm half Brazilian, half Japanese, and so I was really into classical music, the canonical stuff, and it felt to me that you either had to be German or French or Russian or something to be a big composer, or to have white skin or something like that. And luckily, I think being Brazilian, you had Villa-Lobos was a big, role model for a lot of Brazilian composers. And for me, it was also seeing, Takemitsu. I knew I was interested in more experimental kind of writing. And to find someone in the Western world who looked a little bit like me, that was just kind of maybe a subconscious thing, but it felt, I felt this affinity towards Takemitsu. Mm-hmm. There's another affinity I have is that he writes a lot of film music. He wrote a lot of film music, right? And that's something also that I love film music, but I also mostly I since 2008, I've been doing a lot of music for theater, for plays. I was working a lot with a director in University of South Florida, and we kept working up until the pandemic. Really, now things have frozen a little. So that there's that affinity to the ability to do this new music stuff, but then also to do film music. And Takemitsu had a big affinity for French composers, Debussy, especially Messiaen, and so I've also had a affinity. Yeah, there's something with Brazilians, we always like French composers for some reason. So that was another kind of thing where he was able to use that music and through his own lens, and the piano writing specifically makes its way into this orchestral piece. There's one part in the piece where you hear the piano play these kind of it's not really a solo, but it's a very intricate kind of pattern that they play. But it's the kind of voicing that he does, the kind of voice leading that happens is very much in that world of Messiaen, kind of piano music. But for me, it was like filtered through Takemitsu and then doing my own thing, and I think overall Takemitsu's synthesis of East and West music was always the most interesting version of that I found. Like I was really during my master's at Eastman, I was really into this piece called November Steps. And I think I don't really like listening to that piece as a whole, but there's something about that piece. There's some sections that are so unusually strange and wonderful that I haven't seen elsewhere. So I think he just has. I just think Takemitsu has a great ear.
Yeah, I was. Oh, sorry, Danny, please.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Eric.
No, I was just going to say I was thinking of that piece and the clouds of resonant chords that it's a real sense of space that you have in Takemitsu's music, and it reminded me of some of the textures you were evoking. Danny.
Oh, I was going to ask, what does the title mean?
Yeah, the title means doesn't mean much really. I was just really trying to recreate kind of the spirit of the music and the mechanics of the music in just like a few words, or something like that. That was what I was trying to do. So for example, Ploy expresses the idea of maybe that different characters are working independently or maybe conspiring against each other or something, And the word pivot, I was just indicating that things, even though things might be connected, they are disconnected. They are actually connected to different things. And I was borrowing the term from, harmonic pivot chords or pivot notes, that are used to make modulations possible. So in my piece, I was thinking a lot of pivot objects, kind of thing. The original title was actually Ploy Pivot Play, because I try to be playful with it, and it was really, these might be separate words, but they're connected through alliteration and just anyway. So yeah, I was just trying to work out some clever way of expressing the mechanics of the piece.
Yeah, well, let's take a listen to some of this. And so I thought we'd start from the very beginning, where we have perhaps this first musical object comes in, this first ploy, which is the harp. And the harp, this music comes back over and over in a recursive reprise. And we have a number of different characters, but we can see here at the beginning some very interesting notation here on the harp, this vibrato of pressing the string in, where you get a sound almost, Danny and I were thinking, sounded a little bit like a Japanese instrument, the koto. So that brought to mind the Takemitsu influence as well, but some really beautiful music here with harmonics and all different techniques on the harp. And so you're also tuning down a quarter tone as well. So the world of the intonation is in a different one from other instruments. So let's just take a listen to this very first two bars here. So we'll get a second chance to hear that. So this next bit, for our audiences listening, we're going to play a little bit more of the opening section, and you'll see here we have a list of different objects, musical characters, you might think of them, that, as Igor was saying, they're contrasting in different ways. So we have this harp, lyrical harp solo. We have xylophone that has these very sharp, high percussive sounds. Then there's the strings in contrast have this still floating quality. And then the wind, brass, and basses have these kind of lush resonant chords, and the strings are rustling. And so we can see how these are placed in superimposition of one another. These discrete, very contrasting ideas then all start working together. And if you listen, you can try to still hear these different threads and how they start to build to create something really, really beautiful on top. So here's a little bit of the opening. My mouse disappeared. So we have there the bass drum hit, and you can hear these objects that are superimposed, but also contrasting. And so these characters reprise later. And so we'll see these sharp sounds here now being translated to the violins. And you can see violin 1 and violin 2, their lines of music, and they're here doing pizzicato, which are these plucking their strings, but here very, very high. So there's a very brittle sound, almost like mimicking a xylophone, but they're descending here at different speeds from one another. So you get these different almost streams of music coexisting at once. And we see the violas and cellos doing a more lyrical sighing, swooping gesture underneath. And then on the next page, Danny, when we were talking beforehand, she called this a woodwind aviary. So we can see here all these different woodwind players. We have the flutes, we have oboes, English horn, clarinets, bassoons. They're each playing lyrical lines that are perhaps like bird calls here, but all a jumble on top of one another. So kind of very fluttering sounds, and you'll get to hear that. So in this section later on in the piece, about halfway through, we start to see the same characters and objects, but they're being rearranged and interrupting themselves in different ways. So we have the harp, we have these sharp falling sounds like the xylophone at the beginning. There's still this rustling. There's the now new character of the woodwind Avery, but there's still the resonant chords and floating stillness, but they're in different orders here. So we can take a listen to this excerpt and you can see how these different objects come in and out and how this can create our musical kind of narrative, which I think it really pulls your ear along very strongly. That's the end of the excerpt. So we'll now take a listen to this full piece. It's about 5 minutes long, and you can keep in your mind these different objects in the musical narrative, but also just let it wash over you. We are Ploy Pivot. Great, thank you. We have a question in the chat from Ken Allen, who's the NEP's personnel manager and also violist in the orchestra. As one of the musicians about to rehearse the piece in a few hours, I'd love to know if there are any special tips, Igor, you might like to offer NEP players.
Yeah, hi Ken. Yeah, I spoke to Yoichi. We had a call, about the piece a few weeks ago, and I think it's just to watch out for maybe things that might be counterintuitive. So if you have, for example, a phrase that gets interrupted by some instrument at some point, it might be it might be natural to want to decrescendo because you know that your phrase is going to end. But I think for this piece, it's more interesting if you actually just play without decrescendo. So it's really an interruption. It's almost as if you're speaking something and then you get cut off. So there's a lot of that in the piece. So I'd watch, I think, for example, at the very end, there's a trumpet solo that does this 2-note little thing, click, that gets cut off. And then you have this harmonic that sustains a note, and that sustains until it gets cut off by something else. So just watch out for whoever's sustaining those notes that you're going to get cut off. And you'll learn from, as you rehearse the piece, not to give out too quickly, to allow it to be a surprise, So I say that's one. The other thing that might be important from the, from performer point of view, if you have a pretty good sense of the affect of your whatever line that you're playing, to really don't be shy about bringing that out. So if you feel like it's a humorous kind of line, that's this plucky thing that's going along, just emphasize that. Don't be afraid to be extra staccato, or if you feel like there's something lyrical, don't be afraid to add extra vibrato to it, I think it's orchestrated in such a way that if those characters are all simple, there's other stuff going around is different enough that you'll get a sense of what the piece is about. I'll say those two things. I'll say something very specific. I really like this recording. It was from a recording session we did at University of Chicago, but the very opening when the xylophone hits and the strings sustain, they're all like, harmonics. And Danny, maybe this is a note for you since you're here, but they added vibrato to the harmonics. And I want it to be much drier, much more like an echo of the, it's the same harmonies as the xylophone actually. Okay. So that might be something interesting to.
Okay, well, so we'll keep it sense of vibrato, and that's a great tip. And actually that was a beautiful effect.
Yeah, because later the winds are also doing sense of vibrato.
Okay.
And it just has, it also, I think, effective. It's a little colder, it's more contrasting to this warm harp thing that's happening. So
the warm harp thing is gorgeous. And I wanted to ask you, in both of the pieces we're talking about today, the harp is a prominent protagonist in both pieces. And I was wondering, do you play the harp, or is it from your guitar background that you're gleaning all these different sounds from the harp?
Yeah, I do have a guitar background. I do write a lot for the harp. I like the harp a lot. I think one of my early musical influences was this harp solo from the opening of Final Fantasy VII, the computer game. I just always thought the harp was a magical instrument. My best friend in high school played harp. One of my best friends in Chicago, Ben Melsky, who I wrote the piece that we're going to discuss next, he's a harpist. Yeah, I think I just really love the harp. I don't play it at all. In fact, whether it has a connection to my guitar background, it probably does. I never thought of it consciously that way,
It's often in a string section where a plucked instrument is in such a prominent role, but the color of it, the texture of it, it's beautiful and unusual. And it feels, as a string player, it's wonderful to hear and work with those plucked tones, whose resonance naturally die just by the virtue of the vibrating string. Whereas we, with the bows, we can prolong the life of a note. But the harp, you have to respect that it will decay. So I love how you got a lot of things going on before the sound starts to decay, like with the scrape tones and the slides and the vocal, almost the slides on one string are really gorgeous on the harp. So.
Yeah, well, no, thanks. Yeah, I think it's, Yeah, I think just the capacity of a harp, for example, to play one note in many multiple, and timbres, um, by how it's tuning, how the harpist does the pedaling. It's so rich in possibilities, And I'm very interested in this kind of and I think most composers are in this. You don't know what's exactly happening, who's playing who, or what. This deceitful kind of orchestration.
I think that's a great transition to Anima, which seems to be all about this idea of kind of pairing timbres that you may not normally think of as the same, but they're very similar, and also with the voice, the human voice, percussion, and harps, at least all these pairings. I know Danny you had an idea about the beginning that you wanted to bring up.
I was going to ask, in your program note, Igor, you speak about highlighting the anthropomorphic properties of both the harp and the percussion by using vocalizations by the performers. And could you speak a little bit about this idea, even how it's notated for the players, and why harp and percussion?
Why harp and percussion? I think harp and percussion came first. That was the commission. So my friend
Okay.
Don Melski, harpist for Ensemble Doniente, also executive director of Ensemble Doniente, he wanted me to write a piece for his album, which came out in, I think 2019. Is that right? Or earlier? Sorry, Ben. But anyway, he asked me to write a piece, and he offered several pairings. I think one of the pairings was harp and two flutes, and the harp and horn. At some point, I just wanted to work with harp and percussion because I like the percussion plays a lot. We were friends, Kyle Flens. So the instrumentation actually came first, and the concept came later. And I think as the instrumentation was decided, I just tried to match that to concepts that I was already working with. The main concept, I guess, that I was already working with that I can talk about is this idea of mimesis, which is this old idea in visual arts of just art imitates life in some way. And I was thinking a lot about sonic mimesis in my work. So always having the instruments imitate something from the real world, right? And I think oftentimes this happens through composers, and it's kind of implied. So for example, a lot of composers imitate water in piano music. My projects here in MoMA are all about that. And it's always kind of implied that this is a fountain or this is an imitation of the sea, And I was trying to do something where you show what's implied, what it is, and then you show the real version next to it, right? So in the case of ensemble music, I'll have, for example, the sound of water next to the imitation of water, or at the same time or something. In this case, we don't have, a lot of instruments, but I was trying to have every sound that the voice can make imitated by the harp and percussion. And I think that's why the nature of the vocal sounds tend to be more on the percussive side, And so, yeah, and then it's just kind of became this kind of cycle, harp imitates the percussion imitates the harp, both imitate the voice, and then the voice tries to imitate a little bit the instruments. And so when I say this, yeah, and there's this underlying kind of narrative that's maybe about this idea of the harp and the percussion, the instruments itself becoming alive, through having its own voice, kind of thing. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, there's such a playful quality to it too. So I've just put up actually this might have been measures 2 and 3, sorry, of the score here, which even to those who read music may look quite meticulous and complicated here, like a puzzle of all these different sounds. And you can look from the beginning. We have harp playing a note secco, which is very short with clear pitch. Then they use their voice to do a tongue click. And then you have a scrape on a xylo is a kind of specific way of playing the harp that has a different timbre. Then you play with a beater. Then you play a wide vibrato like in Pivot, and you have a microtonal note. You have here in the percussion wood blocks, sandpaper, tip of a rib stick on a vibraphone, and then you have a regular note on the vibraphone, the grill, then you go shh with your voice. So all these different sounds. So we could take a listen to just seeing what the players are looking at in this real puzzle of all these pairings of timbres next to one another. So fun. So I thought what might to help our listeners maybe get in the mind of the composer, of how you take all these different possible timbres that an instrument can make, and how do you find analogs with each other. So I've color coded it like you've just dropped a whole bunch of puzzle pieces on the floor, and you have the red pieces are the harp sounds, the orange are the human voice, and the blue are the percussion. And so we have all these different sounds. And so we can try to now arrange them together where we can see like sounds on every row. So a vibraphone note has pitch, which has a somewhat similar timbre to a harp pluck. And then you get the harmonic quarter tone, which is a little bit different. And then the vibrato is even more away from the normal tone. You have vibraphone tip of the stick. There's a harsher, more percussive sound, harp with a beater. You have your tongue clicks are like wood blocks, like tongue clicks, like harp knocks. You have your guiro and harp gliss and guiro scrape, and then the sounds of the sandpaper and the shaker. And so it's kind of moving between pitch and noise. And you could almost think of this as a game of telephone where you begin with a vibraphone note. If you then have somewhat of the vibraphone, but you add the percussiveness of a stick, that might then move us towards thinking of a tongue click, which then might be a guiro scrape. And a guiro is this instrument, a percussive instrument that has a long body and a ribbed surface, and you go kind of across it. It makes a very scrapey sound, and then the sh of the voice might be a translation of that. So it's really a joy to listen to, and I thought we could listen to the same two bars, but while seeing this visual in front of our eyes now. So you started to hear some whistling too, and you have to have some good players who can whistle right on pitch as well. So the piece is about 13 minutes or so, and so we'll play this through and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So hope you enjoy Anima for harp and percussion. Beautiful. Such a fun piece. I was thinking near the end, as you were saying, about the real world versus the world of the instruments, and that it almost seems like the real world, the almost too real world impinges almost like there's some construction going on outside side of that one moment. But how interesting, of course, it is that from the little scrape that we began to, we find our way through all these instruments to perhaps this incredibly intense rattling sound that reminded me of someone outside my window when I used to live in New York City doing the drill hammer on the street. But very, very, very cool piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
So we have some questions here, or some comments. Oh, we have great, wild, eerie, amazing. Yes. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to add them in here. And I don't know if there's anything you'd like to share with us about this piece to close, or and maybe actually, what are you working on right now while you're in Rome? I'm curious.
Yeah, let me just make sure I'm unmuted. Yeah, in Rome now, I'm working on 2 pieces on kind of the subject of water. The first piece I finished and performed it at the end of January here at the Academy. It's a piece about piano and fountains, kind of about like the history of piano music and its relationship to imitating water, and specifically fountains. And it's being in Rome, there's no shortage of fountains and kind of content for that subject. It was a piece for piano and video. So I've been doing video work, which is an extension of this idea, that we heard in Anima, which is now I'm using found sounds as well as found footage, and kind of creating this relationship between the music imitates, the found sounds are imitated by the instruments, but then whatever's happening is also imitated by the video, and vice versa. So it's adding another kind of layer to this cycle of imitations that I'm doing. And the piece that I'm working on now is this piece that's based on the relationship of the piano and the sea. So it's another very similar piano and video piece, but now thinking of water in different layers and thinking more about what gets transmitted through history from the sea and that kind of thing. Yeah, so the last one is in progress, obviously, so it's a little hard to talk about. Things are becoming clear as I compose it, but yeah, should be done in a month or something like that.
I'll really look forward to hearing it.
Yeah, and watching this time it's a visual piece. Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I think we're just at time, and it seems like we don't have any extra questions. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I'm Eric Nathan, composer resident of the NEP.
I'm Danielle Maddon, the concertmaster.
And we've had such a great time chatting with Igor Santos. And so you can find on our website more information about us, philharmonic.org. And there's also on our YouTube channel, you can see past broadcasts of this listening in series. And this one will be archived for future later viewing. And we invite you to the concert on June 18th at Jordan Hall, where we're here, the performance of Ploy Pivot. And thank you for joining us, and take care.
Yeah, thank you for having me.